Hey guys, so today we're going to talk about the Mayas, the Aztecs, and the Incas. And these are just some different people who lived in South and North America. So the first one we're going to talk about is the Mayans. This is basically where they lived. Anything you see in yellow is the Mayan civilization around 900 AD. So you can kind of see the major cities there. You can tell what they call the Yucatan Peninsula. So how we were talking about the Iberian Peninsula is where like Spain and Portugal are located. This is the Yucatan Peninsula. So if you remember, peninsulas are just a body of land that's surrounded on three sides by water. So that's why it's called the Yucatan Peninsula. You may hear it referenced like that, like what major city or what major Mesoamerican civilization was located in the Yucatan Peninsula. That's what we're talking about when we say that. Okay, so the Mayans. The early Mayan civilization had people living in small villages where they grew just enough food to sustain themselves and their families. The area in the Yucatan Peninsula had great soil for farming, but their environment presented some challenges. So in that area of what's now Mexico, there are some dense rainforests. So it meant that the Mayans practiced what we call now slash and burn agriculture. So they would cut down trees and then burn the roots in order to prepare for planting and putting crops in the ground. So that's one environmental issue they had, was the dense rainforest, but another one they had was very tall mountains. So they kind of had the best of both worlds, or the worst of both worlds, depending on your preferences. But this mountainous environment led to people building flat terraces to farm on. They could, because it was on flat land, they could control erosion and irrigation better. So if you think about it, if you're trying to build on the side of a mountain and you don't build terraces in, you're obviously going to have some problems with irrigation because all your water is just going to go to the bottom of the mountain instead of staying in your crops where you need them to be. Also, if water is rushing down the side of that mountain, it also causes erosion, which means that your seeds that you have just planted, if you have a big rain the next day, they could end up at the bottom of the mountain all in one area where you can't access to harvest. So this is actually not in the Mayan civilization, but I couldn't find a good picture. But this is what I'm talking about when I say terrace farming. So they would actually cut in what basically looks like stairs in the side of mountains. And the steps are a lot larger than they look. So it's probably 3 to 4 feet between like the ground and then the top of the next area. So that's probably 3 to 4 feet right there. So they're much larger than they look. Alright, so farming didn't meet all the needs that they had as a civilization, so they began trading with other villages. And this trade and agriculture led to larger populations, and those villages grew into bustling cities. So the cities and government. Mayans built most of their cities between 250 and 900, and the major cities were Tikal and Copan. So these cities kind of consisted of basically just some stone pyramids, temples, and palaces that were all brightly painted and decorated with intricate stone carvings. And all of these Mayan cities functioned like city-states. So like in Rome, they all kind of had not Rome. In Italy, they all kind of had their own ruler, had its own government. This is very much like that. But these city-states were still linked together through two things. They were linked together through trade. So cities in the highlands would trade for products that they didn't have with cities in the lowlands. So cities in the highlands would trade jade, and they would trade it for cotton and rubber and cocoa from the lowlands. So another way that these city-states were linked together is warfare. Excuse me, warfare. So cities were often at war with each other because kings were trying to gain lands for their own cities and power for themselves by trying to take other people's land. And we know from experience that, or our experience in our studies of history, that doesn't go well. So a lot of times these cities were at war with each other, kind of like Native American tribes you'll learn about when you talk about maybe in this class, but definitely in American History 1. Alright, so Mayan societies and religions. Like a lot of the civilizations that we talked about in our very first unit, Mayans believed that their gods, or that their kings, communicated with the gods. And they also had many gods, so they were polytheistic, and they believed that the gods influenced all aspects of life. So in order to keep the gods happy, private and public rituals were performed. And some of the most popular rituals were ones where blood was let. So these bloodletting rituals, they would offer their blood to gods as a sacrifice. So let me show you this picture. This gets kind of grody, so if you're squeamish, look away. So this is a Mayan king and his wife. This is actual artwork from the Mayan civilization. This is supposedly the wife of the Mayan king right here. And if you notice, she looks like she has some sort of tube right here. What she's actually doing is she's pulling a cord that is studded with stingray spines. She has punctured her tongue and is pulling the tube through her tongue to get blood, and in order to sacrifice that blood to the gods. So that was one way that they did blood sacrifice. And another ritual was basically a basketball game, which is pretty appropriate because I'm pretty sure most of you are watching the game right now. Let me know who wins because I'm obviously not watching it. Excuse me. So players in this basketball game, it was actually called Pakatak. It was sort of like basketball and soccer pushed together. Players would try to get a heavy rubber ball through a stone ring, but they could only use their hips, knees, and elbows, so they couldn't use their hands. The trick to this being a ritual is that the losing team would often be sacrificed, and they would have their hearts ripped out of their bodies, and those hearts would be offered to the gods as another blood sacrifice. And this is just maybe what the game would have looked like. The courts that they played on had slanted walls. This is not a great picture because the walls that the Pakatak was actually played in were a lot taller. So they were probably like 10 or 12 feet tall and slanted more like that instead of just small slants like that. But this is the rubber ball that they were throwing, and this is the tiny hoop that they had to get it through using just their feet and hips and elbows and knees. So that seems a little bit more difficult than basketball to me. Alright, so these rituals were often led by priests, and for that reason, priests belonged in the upper class of societies, along with warriors who were responsible for finding war victims to use for sacrifice. So most of the time when they did sacrifice, they didn't sacrifice their own people, they sacrificed people from maybe enemy civilizations. So below the warrior and priest class were merchants and skilled craftspeople, and then under them were farmers and slaves who supported the wealthier class. Alright, so Mayan achievements. Mayans had impressive architecture, so those pyramids and temples that we talked about earlier, they are very impressive in their size and their building. They also had advances in astronomy, math, and writing. So the Mayans created the calendar system. So they had two calendars. One was a 365-day farming calendar, and the other was a 260-day religious calendar. So priests would consult these calendars to see which days would be lucky or unlucky to start a war, to start planting, or to do ceremonies. And in fact, this calendar system was more accurate than the one used in Europe at the time. If you guys remember, back in 2012, there was this whole thing about the world was going to come to an end because the Mayan calendar ended in 2012. The Mayan calendar had provided for dates and times and was highly accurate. And the problem was that that created that controversy was that the Mayans had only provided up until, I think it was like December 21st, 2012. And, excuse me, it freaked everybody out, and people thought that the world was going to come to an end, but yet here we still are. So maybe they just ran out of room on what they were writing. Anyway, so another Mayan achievement is the complex writing system. And it was only meant to really keep records. So these symbols, or what they call glyphs, represented objects and sounds and were usually carved either into a large stone monument called stele, or it was written in a bark paper book called codex. So that's their writing system. So when we talk about the decline of the Mayans, it's not really clear what caused it. Their records don't really show anything that would signal a decline or stress. Environmental damage from overuse of resources might have been a factor because the population was growing. Drought could have been another factor. We know sometimes that Mexico can have drought-like conditions. Maybe it was warfare over competition for land. Maybe it was the abuse of the power by kings caused people to leave the cities, and because they weren't together, they kind of fell apart. So it declined around 900, and even though we say it declined, it didn't disappear altogether. We think that most people may have moved to new cities that still remained powerful. Alright, so we're going to move on to the Aztecs, but right now I want you to answer a couple of questions in the next segment of the blend space.